Russia's economic slide has begun, and Moscow is in deep trouble. This isn't a Western talking point or an opposition slogan. It's an admission coming from inside Russia's own financial establishment. The signal is unmistakable. The central bank, tasked with calming markets and projecting confidence, has acknowledged what the outside world has warned about for years. The numbers no longer add up, and the facade is cracking. When the institution meant to soothe fears concedes that the economy is shrinking, it tells you the damage has moved beyond spin. The question is no longer whether Russia is under pressure, but how far the downturn will go and what it means for the country, for Vladimir Putin, and for the rest of the world. Since 2022, Russia has reshaped its economy into something that looks less like a market system and more like a command structure geared for war. Every lever was pulled to funnel money to the military, mask the costs of sanctions, and persuade citizens that the situation was manageable. For a time, it worked. Officials pointed to headline GDP figures and spoke of resilience. State television echoed the line. Russia was holding up under isolation. Ambassadors and ministers repeated the same message in interviews. Yet ordinary people saw something else. Rising prices, thinner shelves, and a ruble that bought less each month. The stability was largely an illusion, and illusions have a shelf life. Now, in a rare moment of candor, the central bank has acknowledged what the Kremlin tried to bury. The economy is contracting. Official data shows GDP shrinking in both the first and second quarters of 2025, meeting the standard definition of a recession. That matters because the warnings aren't coming from a single voice. In June, Economy Minister Maxim Reshetnikov said Russia was on the brink of recession. Weeks later, Oxford Economics echoed the assessment, warning of intensifying risks. Inside the Russian system, anxiety is spreading. Sberbank CEO Herman Gref recently described the economy as technically stagnant, repeating earlier cautions from midsummer that growth had slipped toward zero. If these were only Western analysts, Moscow could cry bias. They aren't. Reshetnikov speaks from within the government's economic team. Oxford Economics reflects the lens of global markets. Gref is one of the most influential figures in Russian business. When all three align, the message is hard to miss. This isn't a temporary wobble. It's a structural decline, and the truth has become difficult to ignore. Russia's war economy is buckling, and even loyal institutions can no longer cover the cracks. To understand why that confession matters, rewind to the early months after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Sanctions hit, and the Kremlin moved fast to prevent panic. Capital controls were imposed to stop money fleeing the country. Oil and gas exports were pushed harder than ever, even at steep discounts to China, India, and domestic buyers. State media doubled down, insisting that Western measures had failed and that Russia's economy was strong. For a while, the strategy created an image of stability. The ruble was propped up. Factories kept running. Soldiers got paid. On the surface, Russia had dodged the worst. But much of that stability was cosmetic. The growth officials cited wasn't the kind that improves everyday life. GDP rose because the state poured money into tanks, missiles, and ammunition. That boosts output on paper but doesn't fill grocery carts or keep medicine affordable. As officials talked up resilience, prices for essentials climbed, savings eroded, and the ruble quietly weakened. Households felt the squeeze even as the official narrative insisted Russia was stronger under sanctions. Now even the central bank admits that story no longer holds. Statements from the bank are not made lightly. Its role is to reassure, project competence, and keep panic at bay. If it signals stress, it means problems can no longer be contained. So why is the downturn accelerating? There isn't one cause, but a convergence of pressures. Sanctions have been tighter and more persistent than the Kremlin anticipated. Entire sectors lost access to Western markets, technology, and finance. Europe, long Russia's biggest energy customer, scaled back dramatically. To compensate, Moscow leaned on a shadow fleet of aging tankers to move oil to new buyers, often at significant discounts. Revenue continued, but at a fraction of prior levels. In the first 8 months of this year, oil and gas income reportedly fell more than 20% from the year before, to just under 6.03 trillion rubles. In August alone, energy receipts dropped around 35% year-on-year to roughly 505 billion rubles. That's a direct hit to the budget. Money that once funded pensions, schools, and infrastructure is now diverted to sustain the war. With the government revising annual forecasts downward by nearly a quarter, the fiscal picture is deteriorating fast. But sanctions alone don't explain the slump. Policy choices made it worse. Military spending has surged without restraint. Defense now consumes more than a third of total state expenditure. That trade-off isn't free. Social services, healthcare, and regional development were cut to keep production lines churning out weapons. The calculus was simple: guns over butter. It may support the war effort in the short term, but it starves the rest of the economy. History is full of examples of countries that tried to win on the battlefield while losing at home. Meanwhile, the ruble lurched from crisis to crisis in 2023 and 2024. Each time, the central bank slammed on the brakes with sudden interest rate hikes. Those moves slowed the currency's slide but raised borrowing costs. Small businesses struggled to secure loans. Mortgage rates jumped. Families cut back. With imports constrained, consumer goods became more expensive, and every ruble dip translated into higher prices for staples. Defending the currency bought time, but throttled growth. Another blow came from an exodus of people. Since the invasion, and especially after partial mobilization, over 1 million Russians left for good. Many were young, educated, and highly skilled. Tech workers, engineers, doctors, entrepreneurs. They weren't just numbers in a spreadsheet. They were the engines of innovation and productivity. Their departure hollowed out key sectors. Employers now face a severe labor shortage. Factories are short-staffed. Harvests are harder to bring in. Hospitals are understaffed. Productivity is falling across the board. A war economy can grind forward for a while. But without the people who build, repair, and invent, it eventually runs out of steam. Russia is now feeling that drag. Corruption compounds the pain. With billions flowing into defense contracts, insiders treated the war as a business opportunity. Funds earmarked for equipment went missing. Supplies intended for soldiers were resold or never delivered. Projects ran over budget, fell behind schedule, or collapsed outright. The system rewards connections, not competence. Those closest to power thrive while the country pays. That isn't new in Russia, but the war amplified it and raised the stakes. The pattern recalls the late Soviet era, when graft and waste fueled stagnation. Back then the decline was slow. Today it's moving faster. Isolation deepened the strain. The Kremlin touts ties with BRICS and other friendly states, but those relationships can't replace what was lost with the West. Even partners like China and India treat Russia less as a strategic equal and more as a supplier with limited leverage. The more Moscow leans on these arrangements, the more dependent it becomes. An economy once tightly integrated with Europe has narrowed into a commodity exporter selling at discounts to a handful of buyers who hold the stronger hand. That shift erodes pricing power, weakens long-term contracting, and reduces influence in global markets. The combined pressures created a perfect storm, and the damage is now visible. Inflation keeps eroding household income. Russians are paying more for food, medicine, and housing. Wages lag. Factories struggle to source components and raw materials. Western imports have shrunk, while Asian substitutes are often inconsistent and low quality. Civilian industries are squeezed as the military takes priority. Local governments, especially in poorer regions, are seeing budgets buckle. Basic services are cut. Schools, clinics, and transit systems fall behind. Moscow is stretched, and the strain is felt in daily life. At the checkout, in the pharmacy, on the commute. That reality cannot be hidden forever. As if that weren't enough, weather has hit agriculture. Poor conditions in major farming areas hurt yields. Drought in the south dried out fields. Floods in Siberia washed out crops. Unexpected frosts in the Volga region damaged early growth. Grain, barley, and sunflower output fell. Exports declined while costs rose. Sanctions and global price shocks made equipment and fuel more expensive. Meanwhile, government support thinned as defense absorbed a larger share of the budget. Food became costlier and harder to find in some regions. Agriculture, long a stabilizer, is now another point of weakness. When the sector that puts food on the table falters, everything else gets harder. Healthcare is also under strain. Hospitals in many regions lack equipment. Diagnostic labs work with outdated technology. Surgeries are delayed for lack of supplies. Rural clinics have closed or run with minimal staff. Doctors are overworked, often underpaid. and struggling to keep pace with inflation. Patients with chronic conditions face longer waits and fewer options. Maternal and neonatal care has been hit. Public health problems that should be manageable become dangerous when systems are underfunded and overstretched. When the state channels money toward war, common illnesses turn into crises. The social cost is immediate and personal. This is why the central bank's admission carries so much weight. It's not just about quarterly data. It's an acknowledgement that the downturn is not hypothetical or distant. It's underway. For years, the Kremlin managed the narrative with denial, distraction, and relentless propaganda. But even its own financial institutions can't maintain the fiction. The message is blunt. The war economy is cracking under its own pressure. The consequences will reach beyond the finance ministry. What happens next? Inside Russia, the downturn is shifting public sentiment. Discontent is spreading. Putin's carefully cultivated image as a guarantor of stability has taken a direct hit. It was never about prosperity. It was about predictability. If people no longer believe the state can keep their lives steady, the foundations of power begin to weaken. One sign is the rise of informal workarounds, the black market economy that expands when trust in official systems fades. As more people rely on these alternatives, the state's grip loosens and new risks emerge. When confidence erodes, small disruptions can snowball. The war effort itself is under strain. Arming, fueling, and supplying a large military is costly even in good times. Doing so in a shrinking economy is far harder. Civilian factories retooled for defense still face shortages. Russia has lost easy access to advanced inputs once imported from Europe and the United States. Chips, sensors, precision machinery. Substitutes exist, but they are slower, pricier, and less reliable. The result is a military machine operating with declining efficiency as battlefield demands rise. Soldiers feel the squeeze firsthand. Wages that once looked attractive have been eaten by inflation. Payments are delayed. Equipment is outdated or poorly maintained. Supplies are short. For families at home, living costs climb while uncertainty grows. Morale suffers. And morale isn't just a mood, it's a resource. Governments can print money or draft more men, but they can't easily manufacture belief in eventual victory once it's gone. The elite are not insulated either. For oligarchs who built fortunes on global finance and trade, the pressure is now psychological as well as financial. Yachts, villas, and offshore accounts have been seized or walled off. At home, they are leaned on for funding even as their businesses shrink. Some cling tighter to power, hoping proximity offers protection. Others quietly move assets abroad through commodity intermediaries, cryptocurrency, or foreign fronts. Not all succeed, and in an atmosphere of crisis, the state sometimes makes examples of insiders to keep the rest in line. A spate of high-profile deaths and accidents has rattled Moscow's business and political circles. Whatever the official explanations, the climate is one of fear and suspicion. Trust is evaporating at the top, and when that happens, systems can unravel quickly. The shock won't be contained within Russia. Global energy and food markets feel every shift. When Russia restricts gas, oil, or grain exports, prices spike. That raises heating costs in Europe and food prices in Africa and Asia. Markets remain on edge because the Kremlin has shown it will weaponize resources. The weaker the economy becomes, the more volatile its tactics may be. Short, sharp disruptions to squeeze revenue or leverage. With reduced income, Moscow's incentives tilt towards sudden pressure campaigns that roil trade. Wheat and fertilizer markets are another pressure point. Russia and Ukraine were central suppliers. War and sanctions cut those flows, leaving importers anxious about shortages. If Russia's economy keeps weakening and agricultural output falls, those anxieties could become real scarcity. Each commodity shock adds to inflation in already stressed economies across Europe, South America, and Africa. In other words, collapse in Russia translates into higher costs far beyond its borders. At a deeper level, the downturn marks the failure of the system Putin spent 2 decades building. His promise wasn't freedom or broad prosperity. It was order, a stable, predictable life even if choices were constrained. That bargain is broken. The war wrecked the conditions that sustained it, and the choice to militarize the economy has destabilized the country itself. History offers a warning. In the late 1980s, the Soviet Union faced a similar trap. Military spending drained the economy. Social services suffered. Consumer goods were scarce. Corruption spread. When reforms came, the system was too brittle to absorb them. Shortages multiplied, support collapsed, and the state followed.